introduce our Associate Vice Provost and Executive Director here at UCEAP, Vivian Lee Niatre. Thanks, Vivian.
You're welcome. Thank you, Elizabeth and Bryn, and we're just so delighted to have Ambassador Grossman with us today. I'll tell you just a few things about him. He is an alumnus of UC Santa Barbara's political science program, and during that time, he spent a year abroad with UCEAP at the University of Birmingham. He subsequently returned to the UK. We know how that is. You get the bug and you go back. And he received a Master of Science in International Relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And thereafter, he embarked on a varied and illustrious career with the U.S. Department of State, including appointment as U.S. Ambassador to Turkey from 1994 to 97. He was Assistant Secretary for European Affairs in the DOS from 97 to 2000, and then served as the State Department's third-ranking official, and that's the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. And in that capacity, he helped gather diplomatic support for the global response to the September 11th attacks. His career is, as I said, a varied and distinguished one. It includes managing U.S. policies in the Balkans and in Colombia, and in promoting a key expansion of the NATO alliance. After 29 years in the U.S. Foreign Service, Ambassador Grossman retired in 2005, joining a global business consulting group, the Cohen Group. But the State Department and service just couldn't leave him alone, and in 2011, he was recalled to service by President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton, and was appointed the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I think this is a post that required a degree of delicacy, diplomacy, and grit that I can only imagine. And in that capacity, Ambassador Grossman played an important role in restoring critical U.S. ties with Pakistan. And I think the ramifications of his work then continue to reverberate today. I am just delighted to think that the year that Ambassador Grossman spent with UCEAP in the UK somehow helped shape his decades of public service. And so I'll ask everybody to please join me in welcoming him to share his reflections on that topic.
Well, thank you, Vivian. Thank you very much. And first of all, thank all of you for taking time to participate in this great event today. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I just wanted to thank Vivian, Elizabeth, Bryn for all the help to get ready and do the technology. And thank you very much for having me. Vivian, thank you very much for the introduction. When you say that you'd like to know how kind of this experience at the Education Abroad program kind of had some impact, I can tell you that without the experience at the Education Abroad program, I don't think I ever would have become a Foreign Service officer, never would have had the opportunity to serve the United States of America for all those years. And so this little phrase at the top where, you know, EAP changed my life, certainly true for me. I've just been asked to speak for a few minutes, and then I very much look forward to your comments and questions. And I thought first I'd just take a moment to tell you a little bit about how I ended up in this EAP program, and its importance because, again, as Vivian said, you know, I got the bug, and I'll tell you what that bug was, and then tell you a little bit about the career that it led to, and then finally talk a little bit about kind of some of the things as I reflect back on kind of what I took from, especially my time at UC Santa Barbara, that kind of carried through all of those years in the Foreign Service. First, let me say that I was born and raised in Los Angeles, in East Los Angeles. I went to high school at La Habra High School in Orange County. And when it came time to find a place that I was going to go to university, my father was a school teacher in California at El Rancho Unified Schools. I don't know if anybody knows it, in Los Angeles County. And he sat me down one afternoon and he said, you can go to any university you'd like as long as it's the University of California because it's free. And oh, by the way, your cousin Myra, I have an older cousin Myra, very happy at UC Santa Barbara. And I said, sounds fine, let's do that, right? So I went my great 90 miles north to UC Santa Barbara, and was at UC Santa Barbara 1969, and I graduated in 1973. And those of you who know the history of the whole UC system, but particularly UC Santa Barbara, 69, 70, 71, know that it was a time full of tumult and full of upset and full of politics and full of many, many things. And, I can't say that I participated in all of them, but I was not immune to this. And so it was a very interesting, but very challenging time to be at UC Santa Barbara. And I'll tell you, I don't know why to this day, but in 1972, a professor of political science, Professor Michael Gordon, long since retired, called me into his office one afternoon. And he said, I'd taken a couple of classes from him. And he said, Mark, he said, UC Santa Barbara is great. And you've learned how to ride, you've learned how to play Frisbee, and you've learned how to surf. But maybe it's time to kind of get focused a little more on some studies. And I would really recommend to you that you take advantage of the Education Abroad program. And he had been abroad as part of his studies in his early years. And I said, well, that sounded fantastic to me, but how would I do that? And he said, well, you're lucky. There's the EAP office right here at UC Santa Barbara. He said, there is one snag, though, is that by and large, they like people to go in their junior year, and you'd be going as a senior. But I'll help you see if we can get an exception, which he did. And as I was telling Vivian and Elizabeth and Bryn before the call, I found myself that summer sitting at the LA International Airport, getting on a charter flight with a lot of other UC students from all around the UC system. I'd never been outside the United States before, and I found myself in England. We went to London for a couple of days of orientation. I was given tickets to go to Birmingham, and so I spent the year at the University of Birmingham. For me, it turned out to be a fantastic choice because there were very few other Americans there, and it forced me kind of to live inside of that society. And I lived in a hall of residence full of other British people. You all will laugh, but you have to remember 1972, basketball was just coming to Europe and just coming to England, and anyone who'd ever played basketball immediately got to be on the university team. So I spent a year on the basketball team, University of Birmingham. Didn't contribute very much, but I got to know a lot of British people and saw a fair amount of the country. And it was just for me, I say, a spectacular, spectacular opportunity. And as Vivian said, I got the bug. And I got the bug for being interested in how other people live their lives. And I got the bug for being interested in how other people make decisions. And I got the bug for being interested in how other people set their priorities. And I didn't know at the time kind of how it would really affect my career, except I knew that this was something different and something interesting and something I wanted to pursue. I came home that summer of 1973, and went back to a job that I had all during my time at UC Santa Barbara, which was I was a door-to-door salesman for the Jewel Tea Company, an institution that no longer exists. But I spent the summer selling things again and got myself back to the London School of Economics. And it was there that I started to realize that there was this whole profession called diplomacy. And maybe I could be a part of it. I went to the US Embassy for the very first time to see what that was like. I stood outside and looked at that big building there in London. Many of you know it. And I thought, well, I wonder what it's like to work inside of that building. I came home after my year at LSE, and I spent a year then in Santa Barbara selling things, trying to live my life in Santa Barbara, but knowing that it was time to see if I could find some way to get somebody to pay me to pursue these curiosities that I had. And luckily for me, I wandered one day into the Career Center at UC Santa Barbara, and on the wall, there was a big poster, and it said, take the Foreign Service exam. And I peeled the card off. I sent it in. I took my Foreign Service exam there at Ellis Hall at UC Santa Barbara. I passed. I had an oral exam at the Federal Building in Los Angeles. I'd never been to such a place in my life. I passed. And in March of 1976, I found myself here on the East Coast of the United States for the very first time, raising my right hand and taking the oath of office to become a Foreign Service officer. When I think back, this question of, would I have ever known about the Foreign Service? Would I have ever known what life was like to be overseas without EAP? And the answer is almost certainly not. And so I'm a great example, I hope, of someone who really meets this standard of it really did change my life. I joined the Foreign Service in 1976. I was here in Washington. Those of you who know something about how this system works, you're all put in a class. There were 34 of us, brand new officers. And so, of course, the debate starts about, well, where would you like to go for your very first post? And I think a little bit an influence of UC Santa Barbara was at that time, I guess I was 24. And my goal in life, the most important thing that I had set for my goal in life at that time was I wanted to see the Taj Mahal. And a lot of other people in my class had very more serious reasons to go to London or Paris or Madrid or Padua, anywhere. I wanted to see the Taj Mahal. And so one day when they gave us a list of the posts on which we could bid, there was Islamabad, Pakistan. And I thought, Islamabad, Pakistan, that's the closest place on this list to the Taj Mahal. I'll take it. And it turned out to be no crazier than anybody else's reasons. I went to Pakistan in 1977. I was there for a couple of years. But there, a little bit like what Professor Gordon had done for me, what did I find? I found fantastic mentors, people to try who were going to teach me what it was to be a diplomat. You're not born with this skill, or maybe some people are. I certainly wasn't. But I had teachers there in Pakistan. And I had teachers at the U.S. Embassy who were prepared to convey what it was to be a Foreign Service officer. I came back to Washington in 1979, and I was the special assistant to the Assistant Secretary of State for Near East and South Asian Affairs during the hostage crisis with Iran, all that year of 1979. I was then the desk officer for Jordan. And then again, you know, one of those paths where they diverge come in life. And they asked me if I'd like to stay in the Middle East Bureau. I said I would. And they asked me if I knew what my score was on the modern language aptitude test. And I said, yes, 59. And they said, you know, there's no lower score. And the taxpayer is not going to spend 2 years teaching you Arabic because this isn't going to work. So we're cutting you loose. Go find something else to do. And I found myself in Brussels at NATO, at the US mission to NATO, and learned a whole new set of issues, which was fantastic. And I was there 3 years and loved that time and loved learning these new set of, this new set of issues. I came back to Washington and was the chief of staff for the Deputy Secretary of State. I went to Turkey the first time as the Deputy Chief of Mission, came back to Washington, went back to Turkey as the ambassador, came back to Washington, and then, as Vivian was kind enough to say, was the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. I was the Director General of the Foreign Service, the personnel boss at the State Department, and the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, and then came back as the Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. Throughout all of that time, when I think about kind of what themes ran through all of that service, one of those themes was curiosity. People always ask me, how did you keep going? You know, what makes you get up in the morning and do these things? And a lot of it has to do with patriotism. A lot of it has to do with the honor of representing the United States of America. But a lot of it had to do with that same curiosity that I had at Birmingham. You know, how do other people live their lives? How do people make decisions? How do they set their priorities? And now I was in that conversation with them as an official of it. A lot of it also had to do with being able to define purpose and realizing that, you know, lucky's better than good sometimes, but you've got to be ready to grab the opportunity.
Try it a little bit and you'll see what works and what doesn't.
Sorry.
I think someone unmuted by accident. Please keep going.
All right. Sort of, you know, as I said, you know, the need for mentors. And then also kind of as, again, I think one of the things that I took from UC Santa Barbara was kind of this importance of humility and modesty, especially as you got more senior. And then also, I think also important as you move up, this kind of ability to kind of balance work and life and a joy really in finding the capacity to lead other people, which has to do with delegation. And also, I think, extremely important, making sure that, you know, you're paying attention to diversity and equity and inclusion, making sure that the people around you are helping you make the best decisions possible. As I say, I get a lot of questions about, you know, well, so what carried through? from UC Santa Barbara. And I think a lot of the things that I've talked about, but I give you three. One is there's no question that having been at UC Santa Barbara made me aware for the entirety of my career about the importance of the physical environment, about protecting the environment, about nature. And I tried to make it a priority all through my career to pay attention to those questions. And I especially had a chance to do that in Turkey. Secondly, was work-life balance. Right? I never forgot the joy of living at UC Santa Barbara and the things that you could do, outside of work. And I hope that helped me along the way. And then finally, a lot of people ask sort of how a time at UC Santa Barbara, especially those years, 69, 70, 71, 72, and you went to work for the government. How did that go? And my answer to that question is that I turned out, in what I learned in 1969, 70, 71 was that, like, I wasn't an anarchist and I wasn't a nihilist, and that I needed some structure, and I wanted to work in a place that had purpose, and that was service to something, and it turned out to be service to the United States. So I just end where I started, which is that I'm very, very honored to be here, that the Education Abroad program made my life, didn't just change my life, but it made my professional life possible. And so I know that's true for many others on this call. And I just thank you again for the opportunity to give you a few thoughts, and look forward to answering your questions and any comments that you might have.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Grossman. That was a lot packed into a short period of time. You've given us a lot to think about, and I do agree with you that I think the important things in life, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, what you've carried through: curiosity, humility, and yet joy coupled with attention to others. I think that's really, really critical. And I do think that here at UCEAP, some of the other things that you touched on, the importance of recognizing your environment and protecting it. So UCEAP, I think people on this call might be happy to know, we are engaged in some pretty significant sustainability efforts going forward. We know that's really important to today's students, but it's important to all of us. And work-life balance, this is something that I think we've been really attentive to at UCEAP. And I think we all share this sense of purpose and service. So the fact that the work that all of the staff who are on this call do every day yields results, with people such as yourself, I think that's something that we all can be very proud of. And we sort of, there's a saying in Chinese that when the bald man walks under the moonlight, everyone else like bathes in reflected glory. And so, you're not bald, but we're all bathing in your reflected glory. So thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. We have some questions, and I'm going to kind of go a little bit out of order, but Phil Cummings is on the call here, who's in the UK in 2018. And excuse me, I shouldn't say that. I've got a different name in front of me. Phil Cummings is on this call and says that he's an active duty Foreign Service officer and appreciates your Foreign Service service. And he was wondering if you might tell us more about your experiences during the Iran hostage crisis. And his second question is more general. How would you suggest encouraging more people from California, or how could we encourage EAP students to join the Foreign Service? Because California feels very far from Washington.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Phil, thank you for your service and for being a Foreign Service officer. Well, let me take those questions in turn, if I could. First, on the Iran hostage crisis, again, history, you all know the history here, but on November the 4th, 1979, hostages were taken, but it was a part of a November of 1979, unlike for me, any other. There was a lot of upset and revolution all over the Middle East. You'll recall also that our embassy in Pakistan was burned to the ground in November of 79. our embassy in Libya similarly. And so it was a time of great questioning, of great anxiety, and of great effort to try to get this right. Phil, I was really lucky. I was the staff assistant, and there were no special assistants at the time, staff assistant to Harold Saunders, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, a great civil service person who had worked his way through the civil service to become Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs. And one of the great things that Hal decided from the very beginning was that we were going to get those 52 human beings, the hostages, out alive. And that was the most important thing to him. And for me, that was the great lesson. You know, you study about international relations and you read the books and, you know, all this theory and 40,000 feet of this and that. But Hal kept coming back every day to saying, remember, there are 52 people who are hostages, and we want them to come home alive. And the fact is, after 444 days, they did come home alive, every one of them. And I think that's an enormous accomplishment. And I think what he taught me was, yes, there's diplomacy, and there's international relations theory, and there's relations between states, but you got to pay attention to the people, and you have to pay attention to the human beings. And it was a great lesson. The other great lessons that came from there was about staying calm, right, and having a plan, and trying to figure out how you were to come to work every day after 400 days and 430 days and 440 days of this kind of effort. And of course, it wasn't as stressful as being a hostage, and you know, and God bless them, every one of them. But it was hard. It was really hard work. And so we had to learn to do this work every day and put our attention to it in the best way that we knew how to do, but also to find a way to balance ourselves and to get some rest and to be able to come back the next day and the next day. The other thing that I learned then was that the government, of course, is not just made up of the State Department, Lord knows, but is made up of all of the national security agencies. And you can imagine that during those 444 days, we worked very closely with our military colleagues and our intelligence colleagues, the White House, everybody. And so I got an early lesson in working with other agencies and trying to deal with their interests. On the second question of making Californians, you know, more interested in joining the Foreign Service, you know, I have to tell you that compared to when I joined the Foreign Service, there's many more Californians now. We were sort of we were a minority, especially those of us from UC Santa Barbara in the 1970s. But I think this has to do with the State Department itself doing much more to reconnect itself to the American people. I think one of the things that the department has done poorly over the years, and I can say this, you know, as a retired person, but I think it was true while I was serving as well, is that we understand somehow how to go to another country, right, and meet people and make contacts and present the United States of America, but we don't do it very well with our own citizens and our own country. And there's a very large disconnect, I think, between people who are working on foreign policy and American citizens. And that gap has to close. I think that's one of the most important things the State Department can do. And the more we close it, the more people will get interested in the Foreign Service. Now, there's a couple of three specific things we could do. For example, I'd like to see a diplomatic reserve corps like our military has reserves. And that would tie people more closely into their home communities. I'd like to see many more Foreign Service people get advanced education, again, like our military does, PhDs, MAs, but not only on East Coast universities, out into Nebraska, California, Texas, so that, again, people have a chance to meet Foreign Service people and be excited by that kind of an effort. And finally, I think there's a need for an ROTC-like program, especially focused in the beginning on high schools, so people can start thinking about the Foreign Service as an honorable and patriotic career as early as they possibly can.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of other questions that are related. One comes from Nick France. Can building a career outside of foreign service for the majority of a career still set me up to land there later in life? And if so, how would you advise one to go about that? And a related question is, does the Foreign Service hire later career individuals?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. And this is a huge matter of controversy at the moment, actually, at the State Department. And so first to say that of course 30 years ago, 40 years ago, if you wanted to live overseas, be overseas, work overseas, there were some other options, but mostly it was the Foreign Service. So as you say, there are lots of other ways now to pursue the interests, I think, abroad, whether it's in commercial, in businesses, in NGOs, all kinds of ways to serve commerce, serve humanity, serve country overseas. And that's a great thing. And I think people who are looking for careers today have that as an enormous advantage over those of us who were looking for this 30 and 40 years ago. So your question is an enormously pertinent one right now to the State Department. And your answer today is no. There's not a way to get into the Foreign Service by what's known as mid-level entry, later in life, coming to the service. There's a way to do that with the civil service. There's a way to do it from time to time as an expert or a specialist. But there's no path right now to take people who had a fantastic career doing whatever they were doing and bringing them into the State Department, maybe for diversity reasons or for reasons of getting different kinds of professional qualifications, data scientists, for example. And I was part of a group that we put a report out last year in November, excuse me, for the new administration, recommending a mid-level entry program just like this, so that people could come in later in their careers. It was by far the most controversial recommendation of the 10 we made. It was denounced by our community, the Foreign Service community, because people are scared of it. They're worried. People will come in. What about me, right? I spent my whole career in this, and now someone's going to come and get in my way of promotion. I think the time will come, not tomorrow, not the next day, maybe not for 2 or 3 years, but the time will come when a small number of people from outside will be brought to the State Department to try to fill particular gaps in the profession, to help us with new challenges, right? You need a real specialist in climate change. You need a real data scientist. You need people who really know about AI and 5G. I could learn a lot, but it would be very helpful to have some people who that was their whole career. And so I think this will change, but I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that was a really informative answer for everyone asking. We have a question from Michael from our Bordeaux 1968 to 69 programs, which is it common to have so many different jobs over the course of a foreign service career?
Yes, it is. I think that's one of the great things about the Foreign Service. My career is slightly different than others because I spent a fair amount of time in Washington. But Michael, people go from overseas post to overseas post to overseas post, and they love that. And that's what they want to do. And we're honored that people would do that in the Foreign Service. And so, yes, one of the great things about the Foreign Service, I think, is that you have this umbrella profession, and you get to do something new every 3 or 4 years. When I pitch young people today, and if you watch how millennials and others are doing their jobs, people move around every 3 or 4 years, right? They want to go do something new. And I think, well, the Foreign Service then is perfect, because every 4 years, every 3 years, you get to do something new in a new place for new people. It's fantastic. And so, yes, we don't move as much as our military colleagues, who are often on the move every 18 months. But somewhere between 2 and 4 years, people are moving, and over a 30-year career, people can go to a lot of different places.
Thank you. We have a question from Eliza Newman, who was in Cape Town in 2019, or Eliza Newman. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name. Her question is, could you go more in depth on the process of becoming a Foreign Service officer? Sort of exam preparation, timeline, anything else?
Yeah. So of course it's lots better, and I'm sure, and lots different than when I did this, but the fundamentals are still the same. So the Foreign Service exam is given, I think, 2 or 3 times a year. It's free. I really recommend people take it. Many Foreign Service officers took that test, took the test, failed it once, came back, took it again, because they learned a lot of things from taking it the first time. So the first is the written exam. I understand now that, like all things in the modern world, there are lots of chats and conversations and groups on the internet where people talk about their studying for the exam, what it's like, what they learned, not in any kind of distrustful or disrespectful way, but as a way to share information. Once that written exam is taken, then you move to an oral assessment. The oral assessment is now not individual as it was in my time, but it's a lot of group dynamics, group effort, some individual things. And so people come and do that. And if they pass that, then there's a security examination, a security clearance, there's a health exam. And then what you've done is what's called put on the register. So people who are qualified then to become Foreign Service officers go on a list. And then that list gets matched up with the number of positions that are available each year. And that's a budgetary question that's worked out with the Congress and with the State Department. What I can tell you is if you're interested in becoming a Foreign Service officer, now would be a very good time to take that exam, move through the process, because Secretary Blinken is committed to increasing the number of Foreign Service officers, and parenthetically civil service people as well, quite substantially. And I don't know if you noticed, but he gave a speech yesterday at the Foreign Service Institute in which he said they've already going to increase the numbers by 500 people this year, 250 on the Foreign Service, 250 on the Civil Service. And he's committed to doing even more. So this, if you're interested, this would be a good time, because if you can get on that register, there'll be more positions available. Oh, I'm sorry, timing. So timing is not great. Timing is slow. One of the things that the State Department really suffers from in a world which moves so fast and which private business is able to hire so quickly is because of the security clearance process and all of these various processes. It takes time. And some people are able to be patient, and some people, and I certainly understand that, are not able to be patient. And I think we lose good people who can't wait. And one of the things that I tried to do as the Director General of the Foreign Service was drive down the amount of time it took from once somebody was, had taken the test to the time they might have been given an offer, to try to drive that down. But it's substantial, it's months.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Julia Burkhead from our Israel 1999 programs. Her question is, I am currently working abroad for a small international NGO doing community development. How can Americans living and working abroad develop relationships with those embassy staff working on development issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say 2 things. One is, I think most people who are working in embassies are very, very interested in meeting other people who are doing things like they are. And people are particularly interested in meeting, like you, people working in NGOs. Why? Because 1, it's interesting. And 2, you meet a whole different group of people than they do, right? They have certain, they're restricted in some ways, and they've got work to do that's channeled. But, and you do too, but it's different work. And so I think people are very interested in what Americans are doing in countries that's different than what the embassy is doing, because that's a great way to get context. Also, I'm thinking a lot about this talk that the Secretary gave yesterday. One of the things, Julia, that holds people back now is the physical, embassies, right? They're fortresses, and they're far out, and they're hard to get to. And someone invites you to coffee there, and you say, I'm not going in there, right? Because I got to get there, and I got to go through security, and on and on and on, right? So, and it's harder for people to get out. And I think one of the great things the Secretary did was announce yesterday a really big effort to try to break down some of those barriers. Now, you got to protect your people, and that's paramount. I understand that. but we've kind of worked ourselves into a system where the walls are too high, things are too far out. The kinds of contexts that you're talking about maybe are not so much encouraged. So I was really pleased to see the secretary yesterday encourage people to get out of the wall and go meet some people. And who would you want to meet first but American citizens doing interesting things in the country to which you're assigned?
Yeah. I have a question, but I also want to note that a great many people are noting in the chat their appreciation for your presence and your talk today, and are feeling inspired by what they're hearing. So I believe we can share these with you after. But Joy Gursky, who was in both Senegal and France, 2018 and 2019, has the following. She said she's a UCSB class of 2020 alumna, and she's currently working overseas. And attending this webinar inspires her to continue along that career trajectory. But she's curious as to what some of the challenging aspects were to life in the Foreign Service. Was it hard being away from family or friends or community, language barriers, homesickness? What were some challenges you experienced and how did you cope with or overcome them?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Thank you. And thank you very much for the kind comments. One of the things that people say is that diplomats are pessimists. And I just don't think that. I think that people who are successful at this actually are optimists, because why would you want to get up and solve these problems every day? But it kind of leads to, I hope, some enthusiasm for the work. But yes, absolutely. There are lots of disadvantages. And I think there are more disadvantages today than there were when I was in the service. And I think that's just the honest thing to say. It's more dangerous today. There are many more posts at which families can't join, right? That are what are called unaccompanied posts, because it's too dangerous for families. There's a much higher bar now in retention for making sure that people's partners and spouses and significant others also have work in the country of where people are serving. So my wife was also a Foreign Service officer, and that's how we managed it, right? But today, it's a much broader question about the professions that people bring to their family life. So I just start up by saying, one, it's harder today than it was then. And I think management and leadership at the State Department got to deal with this. But for me, really the challenges were threefold. And they had to do mostly with family, which was to say that, and again, I wouldn't change any of this, but I was abroad a lot. And so I don't have the kind of relationships maybe that others have with my nieces and my nephews and the children of my brothers and sisters, because we saw them once a year, right? We came home on home leave. We went to Santa Cruz to see my sister. She'd roll out her kids. There's Uncle Marc. There's Aunt Mildred. Be nice to them for a couple of days. They'll be back next year, right? So those are relationships that are not as strong as I would like. Yeah, we've tried to do better with that, and we make an effort, but I missed that. Second thing was, for me, I missed the years, of course, when my dad was in his prime, really, was 40, 50, 60. That's when I was abroad. And it was wonderful. He came to see us often, and it was great. But by the time we were back, he was quite a lot older. And so I missed that piece of it. And so for me, it was mostly these family questions that I look back and think, well, too bad about this. But as I say, I wouldn't have changed. I wouldn't have changed what I did. It's just, every profession, every life comes with some downsides, and this one's got them.
Thank you so much. Lauren Leverty from our Madrid programs states, thank you for sharing with us. And she asks, can you talk about the daily activities of diplomacy, particular events or actions that were instructive or meaningful to you? I'm also interested in the intersection of foreign service diplomacy and politics. How do you see the balance of national priorities versus engaging with common individuals in foreign service activities?
Well, those are all great questions. So the good and right answer to your first question, and what makes the Foreign Service so exciting, is there's no day that's the same, and that's the great part of it. There are broad categories, as those of you who have thought about the Foreign Service and studied the Foreign Service, and I know Leslie Gerson is on here with me, also UC Santa Barbara, but there are ways to specialize. People are political officers, which means they can spend the majority of their time learning about the politics of a certain country and meeting political leaders and doing that kind of work and reporting back to Washington what they have heard and what they have learned. People do economic work where they're, again, trying to learn about the country that they're in, but very importantly as well, doing commercial work and promoting the interests of US companies in the country to which they're assigned. So for example, I had the good fortune, I served twice in Turkey as DCM and ambassador, and we were there able to really promote American exports, American direct foreign investment into Turkey, raised the level of trade substantially, sold $2.5 billion worth of Boeing aircraft to Turkey, 737s. And so that economic work and commercial work really important. Some people in the Foreign Service choose to be public diplomacy officers. So their basic effort is to kind of convey to the public in the host country what it is that America's all about. And they can do that through art exhibits and bringing music groups and dealing with journalists. Now, of course, so much of that is done on social media. So being part of those conversations. There are people who are consular officers. So my spouse was a career consular officer, which has to do first and foremost with the protection of American citizens abroad, American citizen services, providing people protection when they get in trouble, providing them passports when they need them, registering the births and deaths of, births of children and deaths of family members, but protecting American citizens, which if you look at the law, is really the thing that Foreign Service is supposed to do abroad more than anything else. And so that's an honorable and very rewarding path. And then we have people who are also paying a lot of attention to kind of the management and administration of these embassies abroad, how they work and how they are kept up and making sure that people have the wherewithal to do their work. Also, there are other foreign services in our country. So there's the Foreign Agricultural Service run by the Department of Agriculture. So people who have a great interest in agriculture can serve their country as a foreign agricultural officer. And I was privileged to have a number of them on my staff in Turkey. We did a lot of agriculture business there for American companies. The Commerce Department has a foreign service called the Foreign Commercial Service to help promote American exports and investment. And they are also represented on most country teams. So there's a wide range of things of what people can do. And it comes fundamentally down to representing the United States in the way that you know best, that is most comfortable for you in topics that are interesting to you. I'd say that kind of every time really there was some event for me, there was some lesson to be taken from it. I started out, as I said, in Pakistan. I was a junior person. I rotated around through the embassy, and in every place I had a chance to learn something. I was the backup consular officer. Consul was away, 9 people, mountaineers were on Nanga Parbat's high mountain in Pakistan. They all got killed, right? And so suddenly I'm dealing with their families and them and their bodies. And for a junior person, I'd never done anything like this before. So you learn about how to do that. And it really helps you because later when you supervise those people, well, you've done that. You've done those things. I had a chance to learn from Pakistanis as a political officer a lot about what it's like to live in a country that at that time, not a democracy, and what it was like to be a political prisoner and what it was like to be, under house arrest. And so all those things you sort of carry forward about how to move things along. So I tried to kind of learn these lessons along the way. And finally, on the question of foreign policy and people, as I tried to answer the previous question, I think the State Department has a long way to go to kind of realign itself with the American public. Again, I don't mean to be assigning reading here, but a couple of years ago, the University of Nebraska did a study of Nebraskans about what do they want in their foreign policy? What do they think is important in their foreign policy? And it was them, the University of Nebraska and the Carnegie Endowment. And it was really interesting. They polled people and they talked to people. And what a stark difference between people who spend their lives in the Foreign Service thinking, well, we want this and we want this and we want this. And people in Nebraska say, nah, we want this and this and this. And so the fact that there's this misalignment is bad, obviously, for the United States. And I think particularly bad for the State Department and the Foreign Service.
Well, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. We have time for just a couple more questions. One comes from Nancy Chen Erickson, who is in Padova from 68 to 69. And she asks, do you recommend certain majors in college? And I think tied to that, Joy Gursky asked a second question, which was, do you think a master's degree in something related to international affairs is necessary or helpful for a career as a Foreign Service officer, or is real-world experience more valuable?
First to the question of Nancy and majors, no, I don't think there are better majors than other majors. And if you think about the State Department needs people who majored in economics, and the State Department needs people who majored in, in the arts, and all kind of history, for goodness sakes. So I think there's no zero, nor should there be any limitation in that regard. Maybe it's not such a great thing for the world today, but Foreign Service people are very good generalists, right? So you've got to know enough about things to kind of find your way. That's not saying that we can't do more professional education. Don't get me wrong, but we're looking for people who have a broad interest, a broad education, and to go back to where we started, a broad curiosity. And so why not, be a literature major or a history major or a physics major? All of that adds to, it seems to me, the Foreign Service. And so no, I wouldn't be very religious about majors. On the question of a master's degree, so I think this is today probably a different answer than in past years. But yes, I think a master's degree probably helps today. Is it necessary? Probably not. But it's necessary because of the competition. So I taught at Georgetown for 9 years, and I taught in the MSFS program, the Master of Science in Foreign Service, right? And so these people, they're your competition, and they've got a degree in Foreign Service, and it's the same at SAIS, and it's the same at Tufts, and it's the same in many places around the country today. I know the Georgetown program the best because I taught there. So is it strictly necessary? It is not. Is it helpful? It is now because of the competition that's out there. But Joe, you're not going to get me to choose between real world experience and a master's degree. So my best students at Georgetown had been out of college for 5 or 7 years. They'd taught in Japan. They'd been in the Army. They'd been in the Air Force. They worked at the Treasury Department. They'd been interns, I don't know, here, there, places. They worked like Edgar, they'd worked in Los Angeles, right? They'd done things that they brought that to class in the same way that they would bring it to the service. So it's a combination. I would never recommend today someone interested in the Foreign Service going directly from their BA to their MA, right? Why? You got to go get some experience for 5 years. So that's what makes, I think, a better candidate.
Thank you so much. I think that was really, really helpful for many of our attendees today. I think we're going to end, as we only have a few more minutes, with Joy's final question, which I really like, which is, what were some memorable moments or experiences that you're particularly proud of from your tenure in the State Department?
It's an interesting question. We were at dinner a few months ago with other Foreign Service people, and the question came up, sort of, what are you proud about in your career? And there are some big things, but the 4 or 5 of us who were there decided that the things we are most proud of that you look back on are where you were able to help an individual you know, get a visa to come study in the United States, or someone you helped, you know, refugees that were being persecuted in Syria or someplace, or, you know, think about the Foreign Service people who helped 125,000 Afghans get out of Afghanistan, you know, some weeks ago. Okay, so it wasn't the most beautiful thing, but moving 125,000 human beings, that's pretty astonishing. I had the good fortune when I was the DCM in Turkey, you probably won't remember, but at the end of the first Gulf War, 500,000 Kurds were pushed by Saddam up into the mountains between Turkey and Iraq. And a lot of people died, but we saved the vast majority of those people through an effort. And so I think you look back and you think, you know, where was I able to help you know, the Jewish community in Turkey, the Armenian community in Turkey, or some other group of human beings where you had some meaning. But that said, you know, for big things, you know, I look back, I'm again controversial now, but I was really proud of the fact that we brought Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic into NATO in a first round of NATO expansion, then Romania and other countries a couple of years later. I was proud of the work we did in Turkey to create the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline to bring energy out of Central Asia onto world markets. Very proud of the work that I had the good fortune to do in Colombia, on Plan Colombia, when I was the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. So, you know, lucky me, I worked on some things that were useful and good for the United States.
Well, lucky for all of us, actually, that you were there to do all of these things. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Elizabeth and Bryn, but I just want to extend on behalf of all of us associated with UCEAP, thank you so much for all you've done and for taking time to share just a fraction of it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. I'll reiterate what Vivian just said. Thank you so much. I know I enjoyed hearing your story, and I see so many faces here, and with the comments in chat, we can just tell that this was a topic that was really interesting to so many people. I did want to say a shout out to Leslie and Samantha Koo, who did a presentation maybe a month ago on careers in the State Department. And so, Bryn, when we send out the recording of this presentation, we will include a link to that presentation, because I see a lot of the questions were about the careers in the State Department. And Samantha and Leslie talked about that almost the entire, that was really the focus of their presentation after Samantha's just starting her career and Leslie has been in the service for, what is it, 39? Leslie, I'm going to misquote you. But thank you, everyone. Bryn, anything to follow up? I think we're good.
I have a very loud truck outside my house. I apologize.
Okay.
No, thank you so much for your presentation today, and for everyone who was able to participate and add in their commentary. And I will be sending out a follow-up recording of this presentation, as well as links to Samantha and Leslie's talk. And we're happy to continue the conversation if anyone has anything additionally they'd like to add. Yep. We're happy to send commentary across to Ambassador Grossman to share with him. So thank you all so much today.
I've saved the chat, so we'll go ahead and send that to you as well, Ambassador, so you can see what everyone said. But thank you all. Again, it's always great to see some new faces, and it's wonderful to see all the returnees. We love having you at these UCEAP Presents. If you have a topic you'd like us to address or know of a great speaker, please send it to Bryn and I. We'd love to know. We're really enjoying this new, well, we've been doing it now for a year, but we're really enjoying this feature, these lunch and learns. If there's a time that works better for you, certainly let us know that as well. So it was great to have so many people from around the world today. I think we had a lot of international attendees, and that's also a positive. So thanks again, and we'll see you all soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.